This week on Live Players, we're releasing an episode from the Manifold Podcast, hosted by Steve Hsu. Steve and Samo's conversation spans a wide range of geopolitical and socioeconomic topics, including the rise of China, the future of Europe, urbanization's impact on demographics, and the importance of maintaining industrial capabilities. Please enjoy the episode. Welcome to Live Players, where political scientist and strategist Samo Burja and I discuss the key individuals with the power to alter our current society. Every week, we provide analysis of the news and case studies of live players, as well as key institutions and technologies that make up the global power landscape. Let's dive in.
Welcome to Manifold. Today we have another special episode. We are here in the offices in San Francisco of, is it the Bismarck Group? Or
Bismarck Analysis.
Bismarck Analysis. And we're here with Samo, and pronounce your last name?
Burja.
Burja. Samo Burja, who is the founder and CEO of Bismarck Analysis. Probably some of you are quite familiar with Samo from his writings and his many appearances on podcasts. I've read his writing for some time and actually watched many of his podcasts, even going back to the early ones, which I'm sure he looks back on. There's like, oh, I was just getting started in this. But when you come upon an interesting thinker that has original thoughts and original insights, for someone like me, I sort of pay attention. I put a little mental bookmark next to that person and sort of see what they have to say. Samo has recently taken over management of the editor-in-chief of Palladium.
I'm chairing the editorial board. The nuance there being that, it's very hard to combine two executive positions. So it's a bit more of a devolved and delegated position.
Okay.
Where the priorities are set, but, will I have time to review every single article? Probably not. So that's the difference between that and
but you're capable of nudging them in a particular direction and
setting topics, setting research goals, helping source writers, and managing the editorial team.
Right. So maybe we should just start by since I mentioned Bismarck and I also mentioned Palladium, first maybe just say what Palladium magazine is.
Palladium magazine is a unique effort founded by my good friends, Wolf Tivey and Jonah Bennett. It was founded in, I believe, 2018. It's a San Francisco publication, and it was intended to be sort of a replacement for Wired, which had already failed at that time. And in addition to that, a challenge to the political and social commentary coming out of basically East Coast legacy publications. Lots of people complain about the paper belt. People want to replace it with some sort of technological system. I think that's foolish. I think there's a reason magazines exist. There's a reason newspapers exist. These forms are likely to persist, but, updated. But the concrete organizations, well, those need replacing, right? They have created a very inbred industry where people mostly write about what they don't. If you think about it, philosophically, epistemically, journalism is an impossible profession unless you have a wealth of personal experience in at least something, at least human nature, right? If not, ideally, the industry you're reporting on or writing on, or, would there be any accurate science journalism without people who are scientists themselves writing? Probably not. So I think over many decades of competition for those jobs, and especially as there was this mass failure of publications, it was kind of like, it wasn't the persistence of the best, but sort of like, the worst kind of survived. It was kind of the victory of sharp elbows over sharp minds and the victory of flattering ideological biases rather than presenting a unique perspective. That's why so many of the publications became more similar rather than more distinct, right, over the last 10 years.
So Palladium is aiming to be a very different kind of magazine.
Yes.
I think there's a huge, very physically impressive version of the magazine that goes out, as well as the articles being online.
I actually have a copy here. This is issue 12, which was the Silicon Nemesis issue. It features, Grimes on the cover, and had a wide variety of essays on artificial intelligence, both from people who have.
And if you could see this, it's physically beautiful. It's like a glossy fashion magazine, but the articles are very highbrow. And I guess, sorry to interrupt you, but one of the, I think, points you were trying to make is this is really meant to be a West Coast publication, the way Wired is.
Yeah.
And, we normally think of the media complex as being centered in the Northeast, but I think you and I both think that the new ideas very disproportionately come from this part of the country. And so something that isn't native to that region captures that, has a lot of value.
And that's what it has to be in San Francisco, right?
Yes.
It actually disagrees with some of the ideas that are common in San Francisco. All the new ideas are here.
Right.
Both the mainstream ideas, the new ones are coming from San Francisco to the East Coast, right? And the contrarian ideas.
Right. And so before we get into Bismarck, I just want to say that Samo and I, we just finished being at a conference, crazy conference at this so-called Light Haven campus in Berkeley. It's called Manifest. And, okay, maybe half the people there were on the autism spectrum.
I've definitely some neurodiversity.
Yeah, a lot of neurodiversity, but I don't think I've ever been to a conference with as friendly, open, fun-loving, open to ideas people. And it's just a crazy, crazy conference with, in addition to very academic and serious talks with whiteboards, you have wrestling matches, you have Ayla leading dance lessons, and then a raging party every night. So I guess I got into
it was a well done event.
Well done event. But I guess what I was trying to get into is the idea that new ideas, new ferment, just like in the 60s and 70s. Like if I think back in the 60s and 70s, Berkeley, Haight-Ashbury in San Francisco, ended up changing the whole country over a period of decades, right? But emanating from here. And I feel that as well as you. So I was at a house party at your place. This is a month ago. But it was part party, part intellectual salon.
Yes.
At the same meeting, you had writers, technologists, billionaire venture capitalists drops by. Where else can that kind of mix of things happen except in San Francisco and the Bay Area?
I think that there are probably people who have some very curated dinners also in Los Angeles and New York, but the barrier to entry here is much lower, and the concentration of human capital is immense. If we think about it, there's one industry that is concentrated to sort of the intellectual talent of basically anyone who can be moved by market incentives and drawn them here to the Bay Area. I'm talking about tech, right?
Yeah.
If you look at merely, let's take finances. Let's take what finance values the most, financial returns. If you went into finance 20 years ago, or if you went into tech, the median person did way better if they went into tech. The same is true 10 years ago and 5 years ago. And people have started to catch on, right, which is part of what has changed Stanford and has sort of elevated Stanford to become a campus that bets on the tech industry, but also some place that at least some people prefer to Harvard.
Yes.
For going to Stanford than Harvard.
Yeah.
They're admitted to both.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, in New York, you have a big concentration of the financial industry. So you might go to parties there and you run into a bunch of hedge fund investors, private equity people. And those people are very smart, but,
they know a lot about the world.
They know a lot
about geopolitics.
Yes. But they're not creating new things. In fact, what I often find is, especially people who come from science or math backgrounds and end up in finance, in a way, it kind of dumbs them down. People that, had they not done that, would have had wider variance in their ideas and what they end up doing the rest of their life, kind of get pushed in because basically, in terms of remuneration, you can't compete, right? So you should just focus, once you're going into finance, just focus on making more and more money. Mm-hmm. But in terms of new, novel ideas, less and less. Here, it's different because if you're going to come to Silicon Valley, whether you become an investor or you're a technologist or a founder, you're constantly evaluating wider variance things. Like you go to the party and somebody tells you some idea that, wait a minute, is that crazy? Or should I invest in this? So that you're constantly having those conversations here, but not necessarily in New York.
And I think that people are willing to listen out to ideas.
Yes.
They're willing to hear out some of the ideas. And in particular, I think that there's this assumption also that intelligence, even absent credentials, is a valuable resource. which I think is not true elsewhere, right?
I agree. I think in New York finance, it's still heavily credential driven. You want to get to a quant fund, you better have gone to MIT or you got a PhD. If you want to get into a more traditional fund, you better have gone to Harvard or Stanford or Ivy League school. Here, there's an expectation that you're standing at the party holding your drink and some young guy comes starts talking, or gal starts coming to talk to you, and you're evaluating them on what they say, and immediately you're thinking, wait, this person has some really interesting ideas or looks really driven, and you don't ask them, oh, where did you go to school? Right. So that's an important.
They might still name drop the school that they went to or the school they dropped out of.
It's all part, the signaling is still there, but it's not as, it's maybe not the first thing.
I think it's like a top 10 indicator, but not a top 3 indicator. Yeah. And I think that's a massive difference from the rest of the country and the rest of the Western world.
Yeah.
I think that another aspect here is that it is higher status to attempt to create a new company than it is to be an employee, even at a very prestigious company. Now, there are like golden periods where sort of like people would prefer to be an OpenAI engineer in 2023 or 2022 than they would be to start their own AI startup. But even in 2024, that's no longer true. Similar to how the mystique and, excellence of Google wore out to the point where the company is now a byword for very well paid, but cushy jobs.
Where you're giving up a lot of intellectual upside.
You're giving up a lot of intellectual upside, but also giving up a lot of respect from people, right? People will think possibly highly of your potential, but they won't think you're changing the world. And that's sort of what everyone here still loves, right? They still love that idea of impact, and they don't call it impact, but changing the world.
Yeah. Great. So that's, I guess we got into that because of Palladium being very consciously at West Coast Magazine. I want to shift a little bit because we mentioned your firm, Bismarck Analysis. So let's talk a little bit about Bismarck Analysis. Who are your customers? What is the value proposition of the product that you produce?
I think the value proposition is that we have a team of multidisciplinary researchers who will just answer your question as to the state of an industry, the state of a company, or at times even a holistic evaluation of the strategy of a prominent individual. It combines kind of geopolitical risk forecasting with some aspects of private intelligence. To call it a private intelligence firm, not a bad description, if you remember that it's as much analysis as it is gathering a special piece of information. The world has been very busy gathering a global haystack, but it's not really gotten us the needle very well, right? We see this in all the information tools and with the media landscape as well, misprioritizing what is brought to the attention of executives. So part of our services include the Bismarck Brief, which is a weekly subscription newsletter. Its subscribers are a wide range of people in finance and technology, people in government as well. We have subscribers from, well, at least they're interns probably from British Parliament and Congress and minister level positions in Europe. So a nice diversity of views, basically for the generalist who wants to understand what is happening with China's self-driving industry. What is the potential in China to expand petroleum production if that were a strategic priority? What are the prospects of Airbus now that Boeing is failing? What is Mohammed bin Salman up to this year, right? This basket of things that I think generalists would find value in. And that partially also describes our client. Our clients are executives usually, most often in Silicon Valley, though at times also prominent members of philanthropies, and we've also done some work for governments. We've had projects such as, rethinking Britain's steel industry, if the subsidies could be restructured, if it could be, made an innovative, cutting-edge venture again, which is, more probable than you would think. Sweden is still competitive when it comes to steel exports. So it's not all China. There are a lot of specialties, and there are world-class metallurgists still working in Britain. I don't know, do you hear about the news of the electron welding demonstration?
No, I haven't followed.
It was in Sheffield, actually, in the United Kingdom, they welded together a demonstration small modular nuclear reactor in 24 hours that with traditional welding techniques would have taken almost a year. So great, but who's going to capitalize that? Which industry is that going to be plugged in? In a way, Britain had that talent, but not much.
Now, was that topic one that there was a special request that came in for?
It was a request. It was a client. And sometimes we can, discuss what we work for, or we can discuss who we've done it for. But sometimes you can't do both. It really depends. Because often what our clients are searching for is a competitive advantage in their domain. Mm-hmm. We did like a big overview of the AI industry, including available compute. And there I'm not at liberty to say who the client was, but it's pretty self-explanatory who'd have an interest in this.
So is your priority, I mean, obviously both of these things would be good for the firm, but one thing would be to expand the reach of the brief. The other one would be to have more clients ordering bespoke research reports. Where do you prioritize them?
I've always prioritized the client relationship because I believed it to be more impactful. Mm-hmm. However, to keep in touch with clients and to remind them of your offering, including the specialized work, we had a newsletter. We actually had it for years. But at one point I realized, is it possible for us to democratize this product? Because it had become pretty all-encompassing. Mm-hmm. And the answer was yes. There were many people who were willing to pay, a reasonable sum of $2,000 a year or whatever to receive in their inbox this one weekly report, which basically goes into a deep case study on a single topic, and then trust that the selection of topics is worth at least a skim to then decide if this is worth a deeper read. Mm-hmm. They're impeccably cited and so on. So the funny part is that it was an information product that developed out of reminding our client after we successfully completed our commissions that, hey, even if you're not deciding to hire us for retainer to be at your beck and call to solve, to give you the information you need when you need it.
Right.
Here's what we're thinking about. Right. Here's an example of what we can do. So the briefs are actually, I think, fairly representative, not of the extent or depth, but of the quality of our research work.
I see. And in the briefs, you're not trying to be, you're not trying to have, for example, the kind of broad covers that the FT or the Economist would have. Is it more what you find interesting that week? It's not we got to cover everything that happened this week.
It is not news. It is a series of one deep weekly case study. Okay. I think it is worthwhile to read. I think over the course of a few years, one will touch on most of the strategically important topics, but I basically chose that pace because I believe that there are very few shortcuts. Mm-hmm. If you want to have an informed opinion on something, you have to read at least one medium or deep dive, ideally, on the topic. Mm-hmm. You might choose not to. Maybe the Chinese nuclear industry doesn't matter. Maybe Sweden's weapons manufacturing and how they will adjust to now being an ADOM. Maybe that doesn't matter, but something shows up. Right. Something's relevant and something you've heard news about, and then you click that brief and you read it and you actually know more than the headlines would give. Right. And the selection is driven also by my view of what is most interesting, what makes for most surprising case study. For example, there are things that are not as flashy, but I think are deeply relevant, such as a look at Estonia's sort of digital republic and administration, where the most interesting aspect of it is that they have only 50% per capita of the number of government employees as Belgium. However, Belgium has also now adopted basically the same set of technologies as Estonia. So what's the difference? Well, when you introduce computers to replace bureaucrats, it sure does help if you first fired all bureaucrats, right? Which Estonia had to do in the 1990s because it was, they could not have former Soviet officials still governing the country. So they just put kind of a blanket ban on those. Right. And then they had the, shortage of trained people. And actually, one of the interesting things about Estonia was there was a center of computer science in the city. So sort of like, that was a nail and there was a hammer. Right. And the hammer hit the nail. Right. And, today, if Belgium would need to go through a similar political revolution to reduce the number of administrators.
The legacy interests are hard to overcome.
Exactly. But when I say talk to colleagues and clients in Silicon Valley, they often think technology itself is sufficient for disruption.
Right.
And I think technology gives the opportunity for a disruption.
Yeah, I spent time in Estonia, in Tallinn, and it's amazing how digitized their government is. It's really well, of course, it's a small country, but definitely they're one of the leading countries in digitizing everything, making it super efficient.
You can do basically everything except get married on your computer.
Right.
And the government has a policy. It only asks you for your information once for any given piece of information.
Right.
Remarkably high trust. I'm not sure who could scale that to the United States, but wouldn't it be nice if bureaucrats stopped externalizing their work onto the citizens, onto the consumers and customers?
Right.
Hey everybody, Eric here with a word from our sponsors. As a developer, the journey from concept to production-ready LLM apps is fraught with challenges. Dealing with unpredictable LLM outputs, correctly handling PII, and ballooning API costs can all be blockers to shipping your next AI-powered feature. Weights and Biases Weave is a lightweight AI developer toolkit designed to simplify your LLM app development. With Weave, you can trace and debug input, metadata, and output with just 2 lines of code. Weave helps you run rigorous evaluations and securely manage all of your data sets and system configurations, so you can focus on what matters most, iterating and improving on your LLM-powered applications. Plus, Weave integrates seamlessly with your favorite APIs and libraries, including OpenAI, Anthropic, Mistral AI, Cohere, LangChain, Llama Index, and more. Make real progress on your LLM development and visit wnb.me/cr to get started with Weave today. That's wnb.me/cr. The tech world turns to the Brave browser for its unbeatable privacy protections. But did you know that Brave also has a private ad platform? Brave Ads offers first-party targeting, and it's been cookieless since day one, so you can relax while third-party tracking cookies disappear from the web. Today, millions of people turn to ad blockers to avoid being tracked and pestered online. But Brave's new ad model aligns incentives for users and advertisers. Users earn rewards for viewing ads, which they can save, spend, or pass along to their favorite creators. And advertisers score points for respecting user privacy, generating ROI without invasive tracking. So whether it's high-impact announcements on the new tab page or keyword-targeted ads in Brave Search offers diverse, private, future-proof ad formats for all your business goals. Join the future of advertising at brave.com/ads. Mention Turpentine to get 25% off your first campaign.
So tell me how you started Bismarck, because even deciding on what is the right business model, there must have been a process of that. Were you already familiar with, for example, what McKinsey does, or other things that are at least sort of in the same universe as Bismarck? Maybe you can talk about that.
I was familiar with various firms such as Einbremer, Stern, McKinsey, and so on. My view was at the time that what I basically wanted was a high degree of research freedom. Mm-hmm. I felt I had a unique approach to thinking about economics, politics, society, even history. Mm-hmm. Though, all of those views in history are harder to monetize.
Right.
The big social theories are hard to monetize, but once you apply it, well, okay, there's some alpha there. And my view was that this was much, much easier to do by just starting a new firm. I also felt that there was a cultural fear between the East and West Coast, which caused basically West Coast founders and corporations and CEOs, especially in tech, to distrust and question the value of services like McKinsey.
Right.
There's a rift between, let's call it corporate America and corporate California. And I think it was easy for me to demonstrate that I had, those qualities that they tend to value in a software engineer. So those were kind of the two views. I had theories that I thought, of course, it was biased or extra smart and extra good. And I was not interested in fighting the boss to present those to a client, number one. Number two, I thought there would be an opening for marketing. And in 2007, this turned out to be the case. Before that, I had mostly worked as the nonprofit researcher. I'd been associated with, a few organizations, There was one interesting one called Leverage Research. Founded by Jeff Handers.
Yeah, and we were just at the house of, sorry, what's his name? I want to say Mencius Bulbug, but his real name,
Curtis Yarwood.
Curtis Yarwood. Yeah. Apparently, was he perfectly involved in this leverage? No.
Okay, he wasn't.
Okay.
But then later had a research fellowship at the Long Now Foundation.
Yeah.
Sort of a creation of Stuart Brand, Kevin Kelly.
Yes.
Kind of the original counterculture of Silicon Valley. Today, many people don't realize that a lot of the people who started the hippie movement grew disillusioned with the hippie movement.
Yes.
And left it for the hacker world.
Yes.
And Stuart Brand is exactly that.
The whole Earth catalog.
Exactly, yeah. I did once go interview at Curtis's for Urbit that he was founding, but I decided not to do that. So there's an alternate universe where I'm a software engineer.
Interesting. So I didn't realize Bismarck was it founded in 2007?
2017.
17. Okay.
Yeah.
I think it was that old. Okay.
Yeah. Did I misspeak?
I don't know. I know.
Okay. Yeah.
I may have misheard you.
Yeah.
I see. Okay. So now, usually the people that are good at research are not necessarily good at client relations or selling the work to people. So are you so talented that you can do both, or do you have other people that do that, play that role?
I honestly think I'm pretty good at both, which is conceded, but I think I'm quite good at both. But the truth is that there are many, many talented researchers, and there's always an alpha in hiring people who are underrated in some way or another.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And we have hired people both from the Bay Area, but also, for example, from London, right? From the United Kingdom. There's a research team there. I joke with my friends that there is a underdeveloped country where they speak great English. It's called England.
I heard this from you recently, and I'm increasingly hearing it from other people because unfortunately the economy in the UK is it's suffering so much that labor costs are low. You can hire an Oxford Don for almost nothing then.
Exactly. Well, we do have also, of course, some of the analysts working directly with the clients. So not all client relations go through me. I do take responsibility for ultimate quality control and the evaluation of every single analyst. And of course, there's like a price tier where I personally work on the projects that the client wants.
This is something that never having been involved in consulting. And in fact, I'm one of those founders who, it's funny because I have friends who work at McKinsey and BCG and all these top level consulting firms. My own brother worked in consulting. And I always thought, oh, come on, if you're the founder and you have to figure everything about the market and the business and build the product and the team, you don't need some consultants coming in. It's some guy who parachuted in from Harvard Business School and doesn't really understand the industry that he or she is in, who needs to hire these consultants. And so I definitely had that attitude that you described a few minutes ago. But one of the things I always wondered about consultants is when they go in and they pitch their business to, GM or something, a lot of it must be in the pricing to figure out it's not easy to figure out what is the maximum amount I can extract now from this client now that I have the business. So how do people do that?
Well, I would say you first look at how you provide maximum value.
Yeah.
Right? That via sort of win-win perspective.
Yes.
And I do want to say that there is, a small difference. We don't necessarily do management consulting.
Understood.
We sort of analyze areas where the company's alternative is to hire in-house experts.
Yes.
The problem with hiring experts is you don't necessarily know how to evaluate them very well. And the other problem is jobs advocate for themselves. So if you hire an in-house political expert, yes, you'll be overpaid.
Yeah.
You'll overpay maybe not this year. Perhaps they'll be invaluable this year, but you will overpay 4 years, 5 years or 10 years down the line. Secondly, if you take someone and put them into your company, they will over time become less and less informed as to what is happening in the world. Necessarily, they will interface mostly with people inside your company or in your industry. They're going to be speaking to colleagues. Say, if today you're hiring an AI policy expert, there are many people who have rebranded themselves AI policy experts. some of them coming straight out of academia, which are super interesting, right? How did they learn 4 years or 8 years, something that was totally different before 2022? Still, they do it. And they also start thinking not in terms of necessarily the company's interest in that way, but what looks good in my career for the next company, right? I think in sort of the diversity industry, this is strongest, where you could consider, some of the diversity consultants to be basically at war with their own companies.
Yes.
Because if they achieve the right result, right, and they're fired, but they kind of have a almost martyr status in their DEI cred. DEI cred, right? If you didn't upset anyone, did you do DEI? Right. So there are reasons not to hire in-house experts. And I think that, I could be tempted to work somewhere and sort of leave Bismarck and be hired in. And this might be even true of some of my colleagues. However, I think the end result is our intellectual output would be worse, right? And so basically what people are paying for is to be connected with us, a wider network of experts that we curate, have these unique thoughts that we're developing, and essentially what's an independent social science research program. It's a political science, economics aspect, right? And I think this is, you can't hire that anywhere else. And as a bonus, you don't have to have these capabilities in-house, and you just get them when you need them.
Yeah. And also now with remote work, you could even have someone who's, almost full time with you, but they can be anywhere in the world doing this kind of stuff.
This is true. Often companies have the most need for this when there is a strategic transformation of some kind. Either they're considering jumping from one industry to another, expanding to another industry, opening business in a new country, or, since it's not just businesses, it's sort of philanthropic efforts, individual efforts, people who are considering, okay, I've made a lot of money. How do I best, accelerate technological development or pursue like a political goal of this or that?
Or suppress certain kinds of technological...
I mean, maybe. Well, you have the which are juxtaposed.
There's a whole industry of EAs, telling rich people where they should spend money to stop AI for.
Yeah. Though I think the phrase is AI safety.
Yes.
But, again, in 2014, when I arrived first in the Bay Area, right, I'd never lived in it.
This is your 10-year anniversary.
It is 10 years in the United States and in the Bay Area. It's so funny. After a few years in the Bay Area, where I never been to New York before 2016, I was like, oh, wow, this is halfway to Europe.
Yeah.
It culturally felt notably closer to Europe because I had just jumped straight from Slovenia, where I was born, to first Oakland and then San Francisco here in the Bay Area. And then when I visited New York or New England, it just seemed like a halfway point, right? And it was oddly familiar.
Right.
Had I gone to the East Coast first, I would have had a different experience, right? The subjective view of culture shock would have been different. But I do think that in 2014, in the Bay Area, some of the smartest peoples were effective altruists, right? The rationalist community that you mentioned earlier had significant overlap. It still does, though I think people who have ideas more describe themselves as rational, and the people who have white-collar jobs more describe themselves as EAs.
Yeah, that's a good way of describing the dichotomy at this festival that we were just at. Occasionally people would ask, what's the difference between an EA and a rationalist? And my answer was, rationalists are people who are interested in being strong in epistemology, so trying to get to the truth and evaluate evidence. And that doesn't mean they necessarily care about maximizing the utility function for all of humanity, right?
Yes.
So that's an intrinsic part of EA, but it's not necessarily an intrinsic part of rationality.
And they might have like similar values that they endorse, such as like, say, probabilities. And thinking in probabilities, maybe a desire to, boost markets and so on.
Right.
At the end of the day, though, I think effective altruists end up having a greater effect on the world because they're less, on net, less individualist.
Right.
They're more like company company meant to use a 20th century term.
Yes.
They won't quite say they follow a party line, but they will say, we defer to the EA leadership on this.
Interesting. Okay, I've never heard that from them, but yeah.
Well, I've heard it. I've heard it from.
Yeah. I feel like it's clear they behave that way, but I've never had a conversation where someone said something like that.
Yeah. And I think it was more explicit in the 2014 to 16 era.
I see.
Over time, all of these things go through multiple layers of development.
Yeah.
And I think that we see in Silicon Valley, there is a culture war, the EAC versus EA thing.
Yes.
That the rest of the world might miss.
Right.
Which is that you will have people who might identify as effective altruists who might end up being at war with their own company.
Right.
And it's not even over social justice. It has nothing to do with it.
Right.
But from their perspective, they're ensuring the most powerful technology ever is developed responsibly, that the profit motive doesn't destroy us all. From the management's perspective, they're sort of getting in the way of delivering products, and don't they realize we only have so much runway and that the other companies are in our heel. And then EAC is kind of, the funniest way to describe it. It's not as, a lot of people who are into EAC are very smart, but it's not an intellectual movement. It's much more vibes heavy and feels heavy. It has like art and like shit posting and aesthetics and all of that. Yeah. And I would describe it as a pride movement for software engineers. It's basically, hey, I'm proud of building tech. And that's why EAC would put effective altruists as part of a broader deceleration of society in their narrative. Mm-hmm. But effective altruists don't see themselves as like, worrying about global warming. If anything, they're probably in favor of nuclear energy, and they're probably in favor of genetic engineering. They're just worried about the robot apocalypse.
Yep.
That is the one apocalypse they worry about.
I was in, Manifest, you couldn't walk 5 feet without getting into some conversation about AI safety and PDOM and stuff like this. And so I got into a conversation with a very clever guy who was an AI safety guy. And I just shocked him. I said, look, what could be a greater accomplishment for humanity than to make some amazing godlike thing that is going to do great things in the universe? And how could you shy away from that? And actually my perspective, and I'm not saying this is actually really my perspective, but it was fun to like throw it out there. He was so shocked by what I said. He actually had to pause and he was thinking for a while, can people really feel this way? And I said, yeah, I think this is what people who create technologies really feel.
I think to a great extent, there's some who are sort of dedicated to a vision of like intelligence expanding to the universe.
Yeah.
And they, care less about the exact cultural norms or like embedded values to substrate. Yeah. But, there's also the other perspective, which is, I'm a carbon-based creature.
Yeah.
It's very unlikely that I will be uploaded. Uploading doesn't make sense. I personally don't want to die. And you interestingly have the immortalist strand, which can go in both directions.
Yeah.
One version of the immortalist story where, people question the inevitability of death for creatures like you and me. They will say we need artificial intelligence to solve anti-aging. And the other side is, well, AI might kill us long before that's relevant.
Right.
And the rest of this technology, it's probably going to get there even without AI. So don't die.
You just said don't die, and I think you and I were both at a meeting with Brian Johnson not very long ago. I don't know if you know very well, but I've known him for many years, and when I first knew him, he had just sold his company, the company that does Venmo, to eBay. The company's called Braintree, but Venmo had. So he was an overweight, typically stressed out tech bro guy.
Yes.
And I had no idea that years later I would turn on my computer and see a slightly alien-looking guy, but incredibly very thin. Yeah. And so I hadn't seen him in person because of COVID for a long time. And we had a long conversation. Some people just think like, oh, he's a narcissist or he's an egomaniac, and that's why he's doing all this. But he actually has a very elaborate framework that he uses to think about this, and it is actually centered on the idea that the AIs are coming, And he has to live long enough for the AIs to actually then solve all these problems so that he can then live forever.
This is actually a concept that in transhumanist circles, people had called actuarial escape velocity.
Yes, exactly.
Right. Another, intellectual or ideological legacy of the minimalists in the 1990s.
Right.
And it's very extropians. The extropians, exactly.
Yes.
The extropians were sort of the precursors to the rational.
Yes.
Eliezer Yudkowsky, Wei Dai, all of these people came out of that space.
Yes.
But also others, like Satoshi Nakamoto was influenced by that space. A lot of the technologists like Elon Musk were, influenced by that space. Yeah. I think this is one of the better arguments for why ideas matter.
Yes.
Like the ideas that direct the surplus cognitive capacity of civilization matter immensely.
Yeah.
We might put the brightest minds of our generation on Catholic theology, or we might put them into physics, or we might put them into AI, or we might put them into medicine. And at different times in human history, each of these has an argument that this is what allowed that civilization to dominate the others, etc.
Yeah.
But I think that's why I don't believe in a deeply deterministic technology tree for two reasons. One is I think we are operating under immense cognitive scarcity. So there's like many, many problems even everyday intelligence could solve. There's just no attention for them because there's not enough of it, let alone the few people who have exceptional intelligence that can be then combined with maybe an exceptional ability to communicate or manage, such as say Elon Musk has, right? Elon Musk is at that nice overlap. A very intelligent person that understands the technology, yet a driven, at times possibly difficult or at least strong personality that manage, right? Yes. And so the attention of those people, what they believe the future is and what information they happen to have changes the contingencies that a society runs in. So I definitely think it's possible to have different areas of technology advanced at different paces and so on.
Ideas definitely matter. And so I agree with you on that. And, one of the things you were saying is that this place is so disproportionately the origin of ideas. Now, in a way, in some sense, we're maybe aggregating in our thinking of, that's a Silicon Valley idea. It may have come from a guy in Paris, but it was expressed online on the internet in English. And then the people who jumped on it right away were like maybe Silicon Valley, Northern California. So it of course, it's not entirely people who are geographically, within 50 kilometers of here, but the vibe is sort of the Silicon Valley vibe for creating and propagating these ideas. Now, my question to you is, what's with the rest of this planet? Like, how come, although I just did say some of it, but still, why is it so predominantly Americans and people like you and, maybe my father or something, attracted to America from other places and everything then is done here?
Well, America's a big place. But I will say, even in America, Idaho is not Las Vegas.
Right.
And New York is not quite San Francisco, though I guess it's the second best contender for a sort of tech center after San Francisco.
Yes.
And during the pandemic, people believed that perhaps remote work, together with truly disastrous governance in the city here, would result in secondary tech centers such as Miami or Austin overtaking it, right? People talked about decentralization, but what they really imagined is a new center. So I think it's inevitable that industries become very deeply concentrated. And I don't think this is a crown that the United States will have automatically forever.
Yes.
I remember reading a few years ago an article, it might have been Wired actually, which was Shenzhen is the Silicon Valley of hardware.
Oh, I remember this article.
When I read that article, I was like...
There was even, I think, a video or documentary about this as well,
Exactly. And then I thought to myself, okay, the thing to watch out for is when Shenzhen starts to build software, not just hardware, because that's what Silicon Valley did. It started by building hardware.
Yes.
It then went on to build software. And I think we have software giants in China that are keeping pace. People here think, AI, they're 2 or 3 years behind.
Yeah.
That's so long.
Yeah.
Well, that's enough to have self-driving cars all over China. You have more cities with self-driving cars than you have Waymo-approved cities. San Francisco is one of the few ones. There were a few deep advantages the U.S. had, though. One is, I do think high-level talent seeking around the world. First, the diaspora from Germany after World War II. And then I actually argued the Soviet diaspora after the end of the Cold War.
That my physics career, because when I was starting out as a professor, the people that I was competing against were the very best theorists from the former Soviet Union who had all moved to the United States. So,
yeah, we might think of MIT, but as kind of like one of the origins of AI. But we should remember there's not just the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. There's also the Moscow, Technological Institute, thing. MIPT, exactly. And a lot of the underlying mathematics for the architectures people now use were developed by those mathematicians.
Yeah, in fact, actually, I think backpropagation was first worked out by a Soviet mathematician, so not by an American.
Right. The U.S. was extremely good at attracting human capital from around the world.
Yeah.
Now, perhaps the U.S. is less good than it imagines at cultivating human capital.
Yes.
So there's an interesting situation where, I'm not sure actually that all aspects of the education system or society are quite as good at supporting developing deep models and developing especially peak human talent. I think the Soviet Union actually, for all the faults of their system, were ruthlessly cognitively democratic and targeting and drawing this talent upwards. And even modern France has still some of that advantage.
Absolutely, yes.
So if you have someone from the École Polytechnique or whatever, and they're mathematicians, right? And that's not actually a given. You can bet that they're good if they're from Stanford, but it's not a given.
Yeah.
Right.
And in fact, actually, the British system where, admission to Oxbridge is pretty meritocratic. There are these personality things. I mean, there are scores and then there's an interview. But the interview is really focused on what you were supposed to have learned in high school and do you actually know this stuff?
Mm-hmm.
So you could say that because Oxbridge is actually quite big relative to the size of the UK and the US, their elite education system you could argue functions better than ours right now. On a per capita basis.
I think especially if you consider that they are operating with a smaller pool of applicants, not just domestically, but internationally.
Yeah.
To be fair, Oxbridge can draw on a bigger pool than the French schools can.
Yeah.
There are many people in Europe who prefer to stay closer to the time zone.
Right.
So they'll go study to Oxford, not to an American university, even if they're accepted at an American university. And also universities are so sticky. The oldest one tends to stay more prestigious. In America, other than Stanford, all the most prestigious universities are old.
Yeah.
And, Oxford and Cambridge, they're so old that when Harvard got started, it tried to pretend that it is Cambridge, right?
Yeah.
Cambridge, Massachusetts,
so of course,
was named to Newtown.
Yeah.
Right? But when they started the school, they renamed the town. They were saying, okay, this will be the Cambridge of America.
Yeah.
And before, when you become the Cambridge of America, you're not known as Cambridge anymore. You're known as
Harvard.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think the only counterexamples to that are, as you said, Stanford, Caltech, and MIT, which are all pretty young.
Yes.
And have already reached really the very top in the world. So
yeah. And I think for California in particular, thinking of it as America's America is still true.
Yeah.
And all the most dysfunctional truths of modern America are most apparent here, but also the most functional.
Yeah.
I think honestly, for example, when people complain about regulators, right? Let's think of self-driving. It's California institutions that were about as fast as Nevada at allowing self-driving cars to drive and to this year, as of March, accept money for their ride.
Yes.
That didn't happen in New York. It didn't happen in Boston. It has not happened in Texas even. So I think to a great degree, there are elements even of California's government, including Gavin Newsom, who are actually friendly to some technology.
Yeah.
People here complain because they haven't revealed, but it's better than anywhere else in the world. In Belgium, they literally just banned self-driving, right? There are many European countries where the debate is still, do we allow Uber?
Right.
That's the debate in 2024. And I think that's also a strength in the United States that the government has been willing to bet on and get out of the way of technology at times. both are necessary.
Right.
Because at the end of the day, Silicon Valley came to California out of a totally different technological center, partly because the aerospace development in the the upfront capital expenditures of the U.S. government were vast. And because of this, again, China, I think, is now matching those vast expenditures.
Yes.
And that's why I think that, the U.S. might very soon not be the only country in the world where the future is made.
Yeah.
I would even argue that the technological revolution is slightly misattributed as fully a Silicon Valley phenomena, where we should actually think of it as at least a Japanese, Taiwanese, South Korean, Silicon Valley collaboration.
Yeah.
Right? What is Apple without Foxconn?
Right. Yeah. And without TSMC.
Well, what is NVIDIA without TSMC, right?
Yeah. But the Apple chips are also made.
They're also made by TSMC. So double dependent, right? And, because of the success of TSMC, I know that the business culture of Taiwan and China is eminently compatible.
Yes.
I honestly think he can't really stop them. I think mainland China, there's a strategic reason they will have cutting edge chips.
Yeah.
I think there's just no way they can't both hire some of the staff over.
Yes.
And their industrial espionage will just be good enough to copy that.
Yes.
And you know what? They will probably be, let's put it this way, if there is a race between the US and China to onshore the production of CPUs and GPUs, I think China wins.
I do too. I think that specific thing you put your finger upon, which is not, it's a collective competition between US, Japan, Taiwan, South Korea versus China. That's one way to look at it. But if you just ask, actually, we don't really have cutting edge fabs in the United States. They don't have them in China. Actually, they only exist in Korea and Taiwan at the moment. Are they going to get the cutting edge ones first, or the United States going to depend on which one first?
I'm actually surprised U.S. strategic thinkers did not prefer the South Korea option, where the U.S. would bet on South Korean chips than Taiwanese.
Surprising. It's a little surprising.
I think friendshoring kind of got lost in the strategic discourse.
Yeah.
Where, look, ASML being in the Netherlands, well, that's fine and it's good. It's not going to be threatened by Russia anytime soon. And, South Korea, it's not perfectly safe. North Korea's next door, but it's better than Taiwan.
Right. But part of the problem is, there are no congressmen or senators from Korea here that can lobby for their home state. Arizona could lobby for it itself, but Korea can't really lobby as effectively here.
Well, there's some governments that do succeed at lobbying the United States. And, possibly South Korea should consider and think about how it could lobby the U.S. more effectively.
Yeah, I think the problem these East Asian countries have is they don't really understand American culture well enough to really operate the way, say, lobbyists for Israel can operate here. They can operate much better. So.
Or even lobbyists for certain European countries at times.
Yeah.
I've heard some very interesting that, Emmanuel Macron, who might soon no longer be the prominent politician in France, went as far as to have personal phone calls with AI engineers to convince them to move to Paris.
Yeah.
That's very agentic.
Yeah.
I don't think that happens anymore in East Asia, though it did happen in Taiwan when Taiwan got started.
Interesting.
There was a strong support to basically create the NVIDIA TSMC partnership.
Yes.
Maybe not quite the president's call, but certainly government support for that.
I wouldn't be surprised in China. I don't know that it wouldn't be that Xi Jinping would call somebody, but high government officials would get involved in bringing, companies or bringing people to those places.
They are not yet trying very hard to convince people to leave the United States. And that's one thing I want to say. I think that people are going back because they're good economic opportunities. Right. Straightforwardly, you can make a copycat of an American tech company and the odds are good that it's going to work.
Right.
So why not do that?
Sure.
Right.
I mean, their strategy is multi-pronged. So for example, and also one thing that's not understood so much about China is that people think it's highly centralized. The direction comes from the center, but each individual city, province has its own strategy. And this is something that I sort of know firsthand, is that a particular city will say, okay, we want to recruit a bunch of startups and maybe academics in this area. And they will reach out and they'll say, okay, we're going to invest this much in your company. You're going to get this apartment. And you have to come here and relocate your And it's, they're trying really hard. Still,
I mean, the provinces they are almost in some ways countries, right?
Yeah.
They still have an internal passport system. Yeah. We need basically permission to change your province of revenue.
Yes.
This is analogous to the older Soviet one. When we're investigating solar power, photovoltaics, it became clear that China dominates global photovoltaics production, not because of a decision of the central governments, but due to the decision of two provinces.
Yes, exactly.
And the same is true actually of wind energy.
Yes.
The Chinese government has stopped subsidizing wind energy because they think it doesn't make sense, but several provinces continue to.
Right.
And those provinces have enough weight. They are seriously competitive with Germany and Denmark on windmill production.
Yeah, and in fact, some of these provinces are, they could be twice the size of a big European country. Like 100 million people or 150 million people. One thing that's often said in China, so when you look at South Korea, there are a bunch of industries in South Korea now that are actually getting outcompeted by their Chinese counterparts.
Yes.
Flat screen displays, electric vehicle, chip manufacturing, they're still ahead, but they're under threat. Software. So there are all these different, shipbuilding. So they've now been eclipsed in shipbuilding.
I think the U.S.
Yeah, but so it's China and then,
South
Korea, and then
they might end up being eclipsed in the production of nuclear reactors, which in turn, South Korea had the cheapest, most cost-effective nuclear reactors in the world.
Right. So collectively across all these industries, I very seldom see Western analysts looking at South Korea versus China across the industries that South Korea is strong in. Also, I think chemicals as well. That's another issue for them. But in China, people are aware of this because they see the tigers, Taiwan, South Korea, and then Japan as their we're going to pass through them, or we're not. And the interesting observation related to what you were saying about provinces is people often say in China, well, South Korea, that's only like half a province. And so of course we're going to surpass them. How could we not suppress something that's just the size of that's of China? So that's all.
So the magic of scale is actually something that the United States had as a great advantage over European countries in the 1900s. And now for the first time ever, there is a country that might have that. Now, this is not to say the Chinese system doesn't have problems, such as the very low fertility everyone brings up. However, the U.S. and its allies also have a lower and lower fertility.
Yes.
Whose demographics are truly worse? Germany, Japan, or China? Who can say?
Yes.
And Germany and Japan are the U.S.'s most consequential allies.
Right.
There's an important way where, we talked about friendshoring earlier. The correct way to think of the United States isn't really as a nation state, an empire.
Mm-hmm.
Think of NATO plus.
Yeah.
NATO plus East Asia and Australia, I think that is easily over 1.5 billion people. It's a vastly bigger economy. It's actually a somewhat integrated economy than China.
Yes.
So when people see Germany deindustrializing, well, a small number of those jobs maybe go to the U.S., but most of those jobs go to China. So the deindustrialization of Germany makes the United States weaker because Germany mostly listens to the United States. Look, the United States probably blew up. No, I'm certain it blew up Nord Stream.
Okay, you heard it here.
Well, I think many people are willing to say this in private. Like, who else would have done it, right?
I had Jeffrey on a long time ago, and he just flat out said they blew it up. So.
Yeah, so he's brave. Yeah, the U.S. blew it up, and who else could blow up basically, the gas, the ivy keeping the German economy alive, right? They had a disastrous energy policy, but the blood transfusion of that natural gas from Russia was keeping their economy alive.
Yeah.
So what was previously in theory a disastrous energy policy, with the destruction of the pipeline, became in practice a real disastrous energy policy. And
yet the German people who must be curious and
there are no answers.
They're not getting any answers. Like you would think we have a functional government. Why are we doing an investigation? They should report back to the people who blew this thing up. But nobody gets that, right?
And as a reminder, that's an act of war. So really, while the U.S. and Germany are allies, it's very much clear who is the senior part, of course, and who gets to set the policy and who gets to discipline the government, right? And this is not necessarily a bad arrangement for Europe. Many American commentators point out oh, Europe doesn't spend much in its defense. It relies on the US. But I think they miss the other side of this, which is because Europe doesn't spend much in defense, the US gets to set the continent's policy.
Yes.
There will never be, outside of Russia, which is, for now what it is, there will never be a US rival to emerge on continental Europe as long as Europe doesn't spend anything on defense.
Yeah.
And that actually is well worth paying a bit more.
Yes.
Right? Like that's what World War II is arguably about.
Yeah. It's very funny because geopolitical realist planners in the U.S. understand all of this. And, them, it's like, yes, we should stay in Europe. It's a bargain for us, right? And we want to have our bases there. It's only occasionally somebody like Trump says, hey, you might, get your defense spending up to at least 2 or 3% of GDP, right?
To be fair, for most of these countries, 2 to 3% of GDP would not be enough to have serious independence from the US. Thus, hypothetically, if you had a European federal government, then 3% could start to be uncomfortable.
Absolutely.
No, it would actually be an independent power.
Yes.
And it could intervene in the Middle East. It could intervene in Eastern Europe. It could negotiate its own outcomes. It would not be good for the U.S.
Right. There was this book, I think it was Paul Kennedy at Yale, The Rise and Fall of the Great Powers.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember this. This is way back in the 90s. But at that time, it seemed plausible to people who were too naive about the nature of U.S. empire. But they thought the EU was actually a plausible candidate for the first among equals if a multipolar world had to emerge.
I mean, part of this is that Europe has had a lot of lost time since 2008. It's good to remember that before 2008 in the financial crisis, Europe was converging with the United States. And if we were to analyze Europe's mistake, I would actually say that Europe's mistake was believing in education too much.
Interesting.
Yeah. They bet on human capital as the ultimate road to development, when actually the utilization of human capital was Europe's weak spot. And in a way, Europe doubled down on its strength, but did not overcome its sort of weakness. And even today, you will have wonderfully talented German math PhDs, Italian engineers, French mathematicians, and I need them here in San Francisco.
Yes.
Because there's just no way to be compensated anywhere close, right? And furthermore, the common market in Europe wasn't common enough. There's no digital common market. Really, what it is, it's a set of no's,
right?
And then every single individual country says its own no's on top of that.
Right.
There's no EU-wide directive to say, actually, in all of the EU as of today, self-driving is legal.
Right. Right.
There's no such directive. There's only the forbidding things, not allowing things. And until the European Union is able to allow things and override individual states, well, that long it's not a super state, right? And, the U.S. itself went through this transition, but it went through it in the 19th century. Europe has very little time. If Europe integrates proportionally to how each of the individual countries declines, then it can't become a power. It must solve something that I don't think has been solved in human history, which is how do you integrate still relevant, still powerful states peacefully?
Right.
I've never seen that.
Is there a precedent in history?
No, I don't think there is.
Right.
I think it always requires at least something of a war, right? Like, the company's named Bismarck because I thought realpolitik was underrated.
Yes.
And I also felt that, you have to advertise that you will make your clients uncomfortable at times by telling them what they need to hear, not what they want to hear. So the Bismarck brand is sort of perfect for that. If you named a company Machiavelli, no one would hire that.
That's going a little bit too far.
Exactly, right. But you name it Bismarck, it's like realism. And even if uncomfortable and it's kind of blunt, but a lot of thought has gone into it. So I was bringing up Bismarck. I'm a big fan of 19th century history.
Yes.
He did the right thing by, if you wanted to unify Germany, no convention, no election could have done it. You needed to defeat France.
Yes.
Because France was the ultimate block to German unity.
Yeah.
And he kind of did it masterfully, where the very defeat of France was the unifying effort of those countries.
Yes.
So, hypothetically, if there was some sort of terrible Russian-European war, maybe Europe could do it, but it couldn't do it Well, the U.S. was part of that war.
Right.
So really, it's a non-starter.
Right. So isn't the analogy there that the defeat of France is the defeat of the United States, and then Europe can then reorganize itself?
Yeah, but I think that's true. Let's put it this way. I don't want this outcome, even as someone who still thinks himself as European, but I think he's sufficient. If the United States were ever defeated, I think Europe might have a surprising renaissance, because for the first time in centuries, it would be responsible for itself.
They would react to the pressure of, okay, all of a sudden we have to defend ourselves. Let's give up some national sovereignty for a really functional federal system.
I do think that there was a missed opportunity in the 1990s for a closer economic, military, and diplomatic integration between democratic countries of East Asia, Europe, the United States, Canada, even Mexico. There could have been an EU, but the problem is their concept of a kind of, EU, but around the United States, the American extended union.
Right.
The problem is they called it the international community. And it declared that it had no boundaries. That actually this is the planetary government. The IMF, all of these institutions, right? Even NATO itself declared its business was global security, not just Atlantic security. And in 1992, this seemed plausible, right? China's economy was minuscule. Russia was actually friendly. People forget this, but it was,
and very weak.
Very weak. There were even people in Russia who were proposing, if you bail us out, we'll join NATO, and you'll get to see our military secrets, and we'll be friends, right?
It was a missed opportunity, I think.
It could have been a Marshall Plan, right? Because consider now in 2024, had he had a democratic, rich, but basically like in Europe, disarmed Russia, but maybe more armed in Asia. That would be a way better position or hypothetical conflict with China. Because currently, China and Russia have an economic integration that basically bailed out Russia. Russia has had good economic growth in the last year, which is insane, right? Given all the sanctions, but there was another first world, right? The true second world, the one that people thought would happen during the Cold War but didn't, now has happened in China. It is impossible for the West to truly function on a major country and bring it economically to its knees if China did not consider free.
When the sanctions were levied on Russia after the Ukraine invasion, I just started checking. I didn't even have to check, but once I knew that they had access to Taobao and these different e-commerce platforms in China, I said, well, they can basically buy everything they need, right? And unless the U.S. has some way to fully interdict that, the sanctions aren't going to work.
And there was no real way to do that, right? That would be it would require an excessive amount of naval, even warfare.
Well, and it's connected by land, so it's pretty tough to interdict that, right?
Of course, the economics are still worse for rail than oceanic shipping.
But it doesn't bring the country to its knees.
Agreed. And
some of these things are rather light, like a container car full of microchips. It doesn't really occupy that much space.
And even Western imports, Kazakhstan's export went something like 400% up. I'm like, that's an economic development.
I mean, a similar thing related to that, the U.S. sanctions on China lead to Vietnam and Mexico suddenly having much more trade with China and much more trade with the United States, because a lot of stuff was just moving, for final assembly into Vietnam or Mexico, but it's actually the main value add is coming from China. So basically they just sort of created an extra step in the products before they came here.
I do think the United States should very seriously consider just opening special economic zones, not in third world countries, but in random parts of the U.S. I think that there is some need to intentionally redevelop a industrial center if one is serious. Not disperse 50 facilities across 50 states, even if that's politically great. Bring 50 facilities to a single state, a single city, ideally.
It's a good idea. I mean, in Michigan, you can still see the remnants of the industrial era there. There's still lots of, or now it's almost all gone. When I first came to Michigan in 2012, there's still lots of, machine shops and things like this that used to service the auto industry, and they're just gradually going away, and the human capital is going away.
And it's already been demolished in many places. I think one of the more disconcerting views is that, perhaps the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991 and experienced sudden deindustrialization. The West didn't collapse, but wait another 10 years, and perhaps over a 30-year timescale, the deindustrialization, which is different than an impoverishment, a deindustrialization as profound as that of the Soviet Union, will in fact have taken. I would argue that it did for Britain.
Yes.
Right? Any industrial capacities that Russia has today were built on the last 5 years. All of that bold capacity was lost.
Right.
All they had were blueprints.
Right.
And the West is now in the business of blueprints. And it's, I think, a matter and before the blueprints are outcompeted. The fact that we need to put 100% tariffs on Chinese EV, everyone knows that's bad news. Elon Musk knows that's bad news. Yes. Even if he doesn't want the tariffs because he knows they're there to save GM, they're there to save Tesla.
Exactly.
I think that there is something very concerning with industrial society where, as far as I can tell, we are post-industrial, not in the sense of having transcended industry, but abandoned it.
Yes. And left it to someone else.
And left it to someone else. And there's one view where this is just a matter of trade, right? But there's another view where actually our production costs were going up and our workers were less disciplined and our engineers were becoming less talented. We were experiencing competency crisis and an environmental crisis. So, of course, it made more sense for someone else to industrialize. And they do all the atoms and water, the dirt to have our society.
Yes.
And, I wonder, perhaps we have not yet figured out how to have a socially sustainable industrial civilization. Because I think many of the fundamental values related to the formation of human capital, they're needed to have Boeing planes not fall out of the sky. We've moved radically away from those. Anything like workplace discipline, anything like hard meritocracy, anything, even the U.S. openness to use technology to solve problems, even that is attenuated compared to 50 years ago. Like 50 years ago, it would not even be controversial. It would actually be progressive and environmental to say, new technologies will solve climate change.
Right.
That would have been progressive.
Yes.
Now it sounds almost reactionary.
Yeah.
It's like we're supposed to degrow our economy. And, even in China itself, I fear this will eventually happen, perhaps more slowly, but they are very concerned about environmentalism. Right now, it's very sensible. They've cleaned up the air in Beijing.
Yeah.
But it could easily go all the way to the Western view and say the lying flat movement. Well, lying flat, where, young Chinese are opting out of the extremely hard work culture because, they're well off enough.
Yeah.
That's a one-to-one analog to what managers in the West call quiet quitting and this complaint of like low productivity.
Yeah.
Perhaps it's just the case that an industrial society requires this kind of mobilization and hardworking population. And maybe our planet is actually going to run out of the hardworking, talented population.
Yeah.
And that's a problem.
It could be this sort of thing runs its course. When the thing you're comparing it to is working on the farm, then working hard with the factory actually is much better.
It's a great deal.
Exactly. And so that has a certain momentum, but then after a while, people just want, I want my transfer payments and I don't want to have to work that hard.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, there's also this view that the economy is way more automated than it truly is. I think it's simultaneously true that we have some jobs that we don't need. And there's some things that basically don't beat people anymore, but we still have them for basically political economy reasons. And it is true that we are suffering crushing labor shortages. I think it is extremely hard to hire people who could design and improve a chip fab.
Yeah.
I think it's very hard to hire people who will, with precision, reliably, and for a low salary, like assemble an airplane window, right? And they're probably going to be 60 years old and addicted to opioids, or maybe Adderall dependency, and they'll burn out. And it is not clear that our society can deal with the constricting labor supply driven by an inverted population pyramid, simultaneously with people's expectations being towards essentially office work. I think as a culture, we have said that the normal thing to do is to get an education, which prepares you for a white-collar job. And you know what? A white-collar job seems easier to automate than manufacturing. Like, maybe GPT-10 will answer my email just as well as my assistant can, right? Or as well as I can, maybe, by GPT-20.
I wanted to come back to demographics. So you mentioned demographics. We were talking about this just before we started recording. And at the meeting we were just at, we heard a lot of cries of alarm about low fertility rates and such. And pretty elaborate theories about what's causing that, related to culture, related to all sorts of things. And you were just saying to me that maybe the simplest model is just that when people move to cities, they tend to have smaller families, and the world is much more urbanized now. So basically every developed country, so China's, I think, at 65%
urbanization.
Yeah, but other countries like the United States, 80% or higher.
And note, the U.S. is more urbanized right now than it is ever before in its history. That's right. So we are still increasing and taking up in urbanization.
Yes.
One thing to remember is that first off, the vast majority of immigrants into the United States come to the already urbanized regions.
Right.
That's number one. Number two, many of the small towns are just dying and being abandoned.
Right.
There's no reason to live in a town that has fewer than 200,000 people.
Right.
It's kind of just a legacy, right? A legacy of a different economic structure.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in that model, there's something about moving to a city that reduces fertility. There's an old, I don't know who coined this term, but cities are IQ shredders. So cities attract the most talented people. They move to the city, but then they maybe don't have enough kids to replace themselves. And so gradually, you're sucking in the IQ points and then you're destroying them in the next generation.
I think that this is, in a way, perhaps something that is deeply true and that was always true, because of the oldest cultures that is truly an urban culture, where we have written accounts of their life experience. So this would be Sumeria in ancient Mesopotamia 5,000 years ago. They have a lot of complaints. There's actually one letter where, I'm better than you. I'm a Sumerian. I can write my name. You're illiterate. You used to be a goat herder. You only started eating bread and drinking beer last year. So in other words, they're complaining about hunter-gatherers and pastoral moving to the city, being rowdy, not working well, not being educated. And we, in fact, see a complete demographic turnover where eventually the Sumerians are replaced by the Akkadian people and the other Eastern Semitic languages. Now, of course, the Babylonians inherit the Sumerians' religion, civilization, they enculturate into it. But what I'm bemoaning here isn't the decline of the Sumerians. It's the point that when you fully urbanized your civilization, you needed an external source of population to replace your fully urbanized civilization. And when they acculturate successfully, guess what? They have to do the same thing.
Yes.
So possibly urban life was always a pyramid scheme where the city needs ever new sources of relatively compatible labor and biological replacement, be it Paris extending its dominion over the French countryside, minting Frenchmen in the process, where people who might have spoken Occitan move to Paris and quickly adopt Parisian French. For people in Britain who might have spoken a Celtic language moving to London. When Europeans, and I'm European as well, complain about mass immigration being unprecedented, I remind them that millions of Italians moved to France and vanished and were forgotten.
Right.
And even Britain, most of the stories of it being multicultural are completely fake. It was predominantly European country, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
But there were many, many Irish people who moved to London. There are many prominent British figures who have an Irish grandparent. Reading 19th century accounts, all of that Gaelic language, of course, vanished. And many of them, when they converted out of Catholicism, also forgot they were ever Irish in that sense. And the Romans, finally, they created hundreds of millions of new Romans. Our mutual friend Razib Khan had good post where he noted that the genetic signature of the Romans is sort of minuscule.
Mm-hmm.
Their cultural footprint is that.
Yes, but what happened to them?
Well, some of them are certainly still around. There's some continuity in Italy itself, but all of those colonies elsewhere,
Right.
mostly demographically, it was a black hole. And in a way, maybe the Italian countryside survived, but Rome itself did not, right? Rome was a city at its peak, according to some estimates, as many as 2.5 million people. In the 7th century, it had 70,000 people. And goats were grazing in the Colosseum. And the most important guy in town was the Pope that didn't really depend on the city, right? He just happened to be there and depended on this big church bureaucracy.
Right.
And, the same thing after the fell of Constantinople, too, before its conquest by the Ottomans. On the eve of its conquest, this was not the Constantinople of 1.5 million people. This was a much diminished town, and so on. So I think that you might see a world where Tokyo is mostly abandoned ruins. Can imagine a Tokyo which is like Detroit, but not because people moved elsewhere, but because no one moved in,
Right.
and no one had children.
Right.
To this day, real estate prices are perhaps lower in Tokyo, so it's a model for urbanism. But they're, lower than some other high-density cities in the Anglosphere, like London or San Francisco. I acutely felt this here over the years, including purchasing real estate and renting and all that. But they remain higher in the rest of Japan, and people move from the rest of Japan to go to Tokyo. And Tokyo has lower fertility than the rest of Japan. So there's like a double effect here. First, everyone is living in a city, and this depresses fertility. Second, if your culture is super urbanized and 90% or 95% of the people in your society live in cities, guess what? The remaining 5% are going to be adopting city cultures and norms.
Yep.
So even if they could be different, they don't want to be, they aspire to it. There's a phenomena where in San Francisco, when I meet someone from Midwestern states, and I often sort of expect them to be trying too hard to fit into the California stereotype. They'll be progressive in an annoying way.
I see.
Yeah, especially if they're a white guy. They'll be like very progressive in a very annoying way. And I think this is because they want to belong. But they want to escape from there. Right? Now, there's a counter to that, too, where you have people who are proud. Right. They're retaining, doing things differently.
Yeah.
But it's really a coin flip, right? And I'm originally, I'm from Slovenia. I lived there until, with some small detours elsewhere until 2014. I know that we continue to admire Germany. We continue to want to catch up to Western Europe.
Right.
And the conservative, the Democrat, the liberal position or socialist position is we should try to catch up with Sweden. The conservative position is actually we should try to catch up with America and be more libertarian and, get into guns, etc. Which is so strange to see. Like, the Slovene conservatives didn't care about guns 20 years ago. Suddenly, they now want to have a gun.
They picked it up from the United States.
Exactly. So city culture, the culture of the metropole, the culture of the dominant power expands, right? And because of this, I think we might have a behavioral sink where the ever deeper socialization of ever more people might result in very viral mimetics. I worry that cities are not perhaps historically were the centers of infectious diseases. Well, perhaps cities are also, the centers of maladaptive mean flux. Yeah, perhaps they always were as well.
It's interesting that so many people just recently, I would say almost in the last year or two, have started getting interested in these questions of cultural dynamics, damage and memes. Robin Hanson, I guess, I don't know if you wrote a large article about it or a book, but I guess it's an article. Is this based on empirical inputs, like noticing that, wow, there are all kinds of destructive trends running wild in our society? What is triggering this interest in cultural dynamics?
I mean, for Hansen, his trigger, according to him, has been the drop in fertility, where he believes this will result in a shrinking global economy and societies that are dominated by, the old will, of course, have less innovation in societies where the majority of the people are young. I've been actually always interested in the cultural dynamic stuff. I do think the bulk of the story, it's sort of like, let's say 80% just people living in close proximity to each other. I think there must be something that we're picking up on a very mammalian level, probably deeply evolved, that is telling us actually enough.
Yeah.
I've seen 300 humans today. There's not going to be enough food. There's not going to be enough mates, etc.
Yeah.
Don't reproduce. And then we build these complicated rationalizations on top. You're like, oh, the climate's dead. Or, oh, I need to take care of my career. Or, oh, this person isn't quite right.
Right.
None of these things ever stopped anyone before. I think we as a species likely lack deep introspection on it. Now, having said that, I do think imitation is also a real aspect of human nature. So I do think that when fertility starts falling in the Japanese countryside, that's not urbanization, that's enculturation. When, again, 80% of the population lives in cities, all the media is made there, all the curricula are made there, all the laws are made there.
Right.
And, this war between city and countryside, it's become very pronounced, but it's not how people were thinking even 200 years ago. 200 years ago, the nation state was ascended, and the assumption was that a city dweller and the rural population of that country had more in common with each other than with the city dwellers and the rural population of a different country. I don't think anyone that's very urban in the Western world today thinks that way. And, in an interesting way, China's problems are also related to rapid urbanization. They're worried about political instability of people who are one generation ago rural because they know their history. Arguably, early 20th century Europe was the destabilization of a large, young population moving to cities for the first time and struggling with city life. So that would be also a place where I would say that the cultural effect is something, right? Like, I think mass movements have always required cities, mass political movements, right? You need a place to organize. You need a place to talk to lots of people, convince them of your ideology, whatever it is. And, I think cities were always that breeding ground. Now, I don't think this will happen in modern China because the population is so old. So I think it's going to be less culturally innovative than people might worry. But you might see that effect happen in India and Africa, where there is rapid urbanization and a still young population. So you might see new ideologies emerge there and new political movements and so on.
Interesting. One of the things that I find interesting about it is that, you're a real intellectual, right? So you're interested in ideas and you're always thinking about ideas. How do you view your daily activity? So do you view your work at Bismarck as part of your intellectual life, or is it your job and then you have your intellectual life separate from that?
The company is designed to facilitate my intellectual life. I designed it as the most cognitively stimulating job I could find and as one that would be most educational both for myself and for the other analysts. That's why, I not only spend a lot of effort getting good human capital in, we expend a lot of effort to educate and train them in this local school of knowledge and expose them just to as much stuff as they can. They complain, but I actually keep the same pace. So I demand of all my employees the same pace I have.
I see.
And my pace is, you can imagine it's many hours of reading a day and also many hours of talking to people. And there's not much outside of that. But because I get to think about something like urbanization, right? I might, not consider reading a book about Sumerian urban culture to be exactly work. But can I leverage and include it in that way?
Right.
Yes. Right. Like I do, it can be work. My activity at Palladium is partially also intellectual.
Right.
I originally was involved because I started writing articles for Palladium magazine, including one on long history and theories related to that. So I think that if one wishes to be a generalist intellectual, the best thing to do is to orient your life so that every sort of, you make your intellectual hobby an intellectual job.
Yes.
And if you're lucky, you will find niches or be able to make niches outside of academia, because academia has this problem where as society has gone into an inverted pyramid, academia has remained a pyramid scheme where you're perpetually competing with more and more people and have to narrow and narrow and narrow your scope of inquiry.
Yeah.
But no human mind works that way. Even the deep experts almost always have something interesting that they on more to.
Yes.
Whether we wish to or not, we are not call functions.
Right.
We are integrated human minds, but think about many things very well, right? The people who think well can think about many things well.
Yes.
They're just usually not rewarded for thinking of many things, right?
So, there are many professors who are doing, some kind of job where they're specialized in one area. Maybe they also work in another, whatever. I think the thing you created for yourself is very unique. I can't actually think of very many other people who have anything like the setup that you have. So,
thank you.
What do you think about that? Do you think you're actually maybe the one guy in the world that's got this kind of setup, or that out of 10 guys?
People used to have way more setups like this.
But yes, in the past. But now I can't think of, I could think of some McKinsey part, but I think of that guy as basically like wrangling business and managing a bunch of associates to make like half-baked PowerPoints and stuff.
Yeah, unfortunately.
So not a right comparison. I have a friend that I interviewed on the podcast, Sebastian Malaby, who writes serious books, usually about business, but he takes about 10 years to write one of these books. So he's living a very deeply, I think, intellectual life and learning, although he's writing one book, he's also learning a lot of things along the way. But it seems rarer and rarer to see the generalist who's really able to 100% of their time just work on increasing their knowledge and understanding.
I think the very pinnacle of venture capital had a few people in the Gen X generation who achieved it.
Yeah.
And, I believe in praise. So I'm just going to say that, among all the Silicon Valley venture capitalists, I most respect Peter Thiel.
Yes.
Who I believe has deep knowledge in many domains and has a good eye for talent across all domains.
Yes. I was going to mention Peter because he also, despite, I'm sure a lot of people out there loathe and fear Peter Thiel. He is actually an intellectual, and I believe he spends a significant amount of his time actually on intellectual activities, even though he's got all these things to run. But
and there are some returns to this. Yes. Like whose opinion would I value for the future of our civilization and society?
Yeah.
There are many venture capitalists who make pretensions to, you should listen to them.
Yes.
Very few are worth listening to. Arguably, one of the curses of Silicon Valley actually secretly being a very intellectual culture.
Yes.
Is that you have random VCs, pretending they're Paul Graham or Peter Thiel, and they're really not.
Yes.
They're really not.
Paul Graham's another example too. I don't know what he actually does in his spare time, but clearly he's thinking about stuff, right?
I think he definitely was at Y Combinator, and I think he probably still is as a free individual, but I believe he's not that closely involved with Y Combinator.
Yes. No, he's definitely stuff that.
Yeah, but that was another company where sort of being an incubator for many, many companies exposes you to a lot of the world. Also, he is an essayist, so there's something interesting that perhaps Paul Graham and Thiel have in common. They both know how to write, by which I mean they have a classical education of writing out your thoughts, seeing them laid out, improving them, editing them, right? It is auxiliary memory. And I worry that we as a society have become functionally illiterate. There are very few people who understand the power of just sitting there, interrogating yourself as to what I think, putting it on paper, reflecting on it, factoring it, asking other people what you think. Do you know how much time, you have written in the past, you have podcasts.
Yeah.
You know how much time you save when someone listens to your podcast, reads your essay or reads your book?
It gives you good feedback. Yes.
It's incredible. And you can jump into the most interesting part of the conversation rather than being stuck at one-on-one forever.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's one of the lovely experiences I had this weekend at Manifest is somebody would come up to me and saying, oh, I started reading your blog in high school or something.
Yes.
And I listened to Manifold. And then, okay, but it might have just stopped there, right?
Yeah.
But what you just said, which actually does happen quite a bit, at least around here, is someone says, well, when you were talking to Mearsheimer and you said XYZ, and then Mearsheimer said ABC, what? And then we, as you said, we can dive infinitely deeply into a very sophisticated conversation, just pick it up and laugh. And yeah, that's an amazing experience, actually.
Yeah. And I think that experience also makes it delightful to work and be active. I think many people who are very intelligent lose interest in intellectual pursuits because their environment just does not reward it, and it's not challenging.
Yeah, well, interesting. Even as a faculty member, you might feel like, yeah, but there's really no one for you to talk to about this. Like, I'm going deeper and deeper and deeper, but the deeper I get, the fewer people I can talk to, and you could despair about that. But
eventually, if one goes deep enough, they're left alone, and maybe if they're lucky and they're a philosopher, maybe they're dead philosophers they can talk to in the books, and if they're unlucky and they're a physicist, then there's nothing but nature to do.
Yeah. Luckily, physics is still, it's a pretty big international community. So, and actually the internet has made it easier and easier to find. So in the past, you might have had a situation where you were the one guy in your department with that interest and that could get loaned. But now because of the internet, it actually works the other way. I can go home and interact over Zoom or whatever with 5 different colleagues who understand this particular area as well as I do. They're all at different universities. That's actually more valuable for me than to go in and being collegial with my colleagues, because so unfortunately it's caused the departments to be empty. When I visit, I was at Caltech a month or 2 ago, or I guess it was 6 months ago, and the number of people roaming the halls was just much lower than in the past.
I think that has immense strengths because people can know each other and have developed relationships.
Yeah, exactly.
And there was a precursor to this, right? The Republic of Letters.
Yes.
Right? Yeah. And yet the culture was always very correspondence-based and international.
Yeah.
Right? Einstein might correspond with Marie Curie over, might empathize with how she's been mistreated by the tabloid press. We are certainly at a point in history where if you have a hit piece written about you, it's a badge of honor.
Right.
But that was true 100 years ago too. And then in the PS, you might go, and I solved this or that problem. Right. So it's much faster. It can be like a live conversation, not just a high latency correspondence. But I do think like living and working together with people is irreplaceable.
I agree.
Occasionally. And, that's part of the value I get out of this city is they're often very, very smart people. And if they're, let's say, retired from tech, a lot of them pick up new intellectual interests in their 40s and 50s.
Yes.
That's great. Yeah. Right? Brian Johnson's arguably someone whose first career was over and picked up a new one.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And, I think that if I were to encourage Silicon Valley to do something slightly better, I would even argue that more of the people who have made their money and their financial and economic independence in tech should consider becoming dilettantes, talent spotters, and patrons of other fields.
Yes.
Many of them come out of biology or business, go into tech, make their money, and then they retire. I'm like, your retirement doesn't need to be angel investing in even more software.
Yeah.
You could go back to biology and physics. Maybe you yourself will never make up for the lost time, but could you get good enough that you could fund other people? Yes, you could.
It does happen. The amount of philanthropy that goes, like from former physicists or mathematicians that comes back is actually getting pretty significant.
Okay, that's cool to hear. That's cool to hear. Yeah. Perhaps this is a good spot for us to wrap up.
Yeah, fantastic. It's been a great conversation.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me on your show.
Okay.
Thank you for coming here to our offices.
That's a wrap.
Awesome.
Thanks for listening to Live Players. Please subscribe, leave a review, and check out Samo's excellent newsletter, The Bismarck Brief, for more rigorous analysis of key individuals, institutions, or industries. Live Players is a production of Turpentine, the podcast network behind Econ 102 with Noah Smith and Moment of Zen. Hey everyone, Eric here. At Turpentine, we're building the first media outlet for tech people by tech people. We're the network behind the show you're listening to right now. We have a slate of hit shows across a range of topics and industries, from our AI and investing cluster of podcasts to shows that drive the conversation in tech with the most interesting thinkers, founders, investors, and influencers, like Econ 102 with Noah Smith. We're launching new shows every week, and we're looking for industry-leading sponsors. If you think that might be you and your company, email me at ericaturpentine.co. That's ERIK at turpentine.co, and let's partner together.